All right, let's get started. So the main prompt is on reviewing the readings. What are the couple of ideas and themes from the last cycle that popped out at you? But along the way, yeah, feel free to comment on yeah, comparisons to the previous cycle, overall trends that you've noticed, and but hold thoughts on like the crash and the broader circumstances for later. So why don't we start with Anuraj?
Uh, so well, well, I was there in the last. Only remember the things in the last couple of meetings, so I was just trying to remember what's there in. Uh, but so I remember a lot of the stuff from the stable coin crash. Um, what I was thinking was like the what I remember from these discussions is like when blockchain interacts with the real world, what are the problems that we encounter? So how do we deal with it? And for example, like we had this discussion on what is mine and what is right. So we imagine that if we have this code is law, and if we implement it, then we would reach some sort of heaven, or at least some people imagine it to be. But I don't think that's the case. And we saw that in the stable coin crash, and like I remember that we were discussing if it's possible to have uh, let's say some sort of currency or tokens without nation states. Yeah, that was those were the things I primarily remember. mm, no comments about the progression from my side. uh, Passing on to Ben.
Hi. I wasn't around for the first season. In truth, I've been part of the Yak Collective from the beginning, but I've been, as I say, in very high orbit over this area because you started the Yak Collective right when I graduated from with my PhD and been working. So I didn't have much time or bandwidth to be involved. But now I have reading these old notes. I'm wishing I could have sat in the winter sessions as well because the most interesting thing about these sort of weekly chats is so I sort of work in the space, and in the space you generally run into sort of three types of people. You run into people who basically know nothing about the space and don't care, um, which is fine. That's most of humanity, but that's just how things are. You run into people who are generally positive or in the space or invested or whatever, and I think they're too positive most of the time. Even though I'm guessing partly one of them because I work in the space, but um, and discussions can be too saccharine. And then you run in the last couple of years, this group has gotten much bigger. Is sort of like the staunchly anti people who, I mean, at the beginning, I think I was like, earlier than 2020, I would have said, well, there's disagreements, but they oftentimes, surface interesting facts or are good at documenting the, wackiness that goes on in the space. Nowadays, I feel like everything's hit the internal September a little in the sense that quality has gone down across the board. Um, where a lot of the critics, I don't even agree with their facts anymore. I think they've just gone off the deep end, and a lot of the people coming into the space are even if they're positive, tend to be, uh, you know, how it goes with Eternal September. Um, so I quite appreciate this group is that there are people who are critical and who are sort of uh, step back from the space, but also sort of willing to learn and not caught up in endless Twitter bullshit. So I've appreciated that quite a bit. One of the things looking through the old session notes for the winter semester is you talk first about blockchain file storage, and you missed the one that's my favorite, which is the SIA coin. And I won't go into it, but it's actually an old project from like 2015, and it even works. I'm even using it right now for storage. It's just clunky, and I have some philosophical disagreements with how they set things up, but and it's interesting. What didn't even get mentioned because this must have been it hasn't been popular for quite some time. It's sort of slipped through the cracks. Um, anyway, I don't want to hog up too much space, uh, so I'll move on to commits.
Hello. Um, Let me pull up my notes. Um, so I would say that um, the sessions that we did with the people from Clarity and Rafa and Kia, all the sessions where we had people visiting, um, those were really great and were a nice complement to some of the development of our way of thinking and discussing this topic internally. So having that kind of oscillation between internal discussions and then bringing people in to have a wider discussion, I think was successful. I wasn't as interested in the sessions where we were kind of trend telling. What I mean by that is the discussion we had around Terra Luna, like the discussion about like, do you need a nation state, and like what are like the elements of force, that kind of backward currency. I guess that's sort of interesting, but I don't know. I feel like that sort of, I kind of agree with what Ben was saying, that getting a little bit outside of the kind of predominant discourse was something that attracted me to uh, joining this this study track in the first place. I remember Venkatesh's, you know, couple of threads that um, he started when he was looking at this, and it was kind of an earnest, like thoughtful, considered, uh, just approach, but then like couched in the kind of wider metaphorical analogies that I think are really rich with how Venkat kind of puts things out in a public facing manner. And so, you know, getting to stay in that space, I think, is more interesting than trying to kind of tail whatever is like most immediately grabbing the attention in the space. And then I would sort of say, like, just scoping out a little bit, I haven't had the chance to be as involved as I'd like in this last season, mostly due to other commitments and bandwidth. But I do think in the last couple of weeks, the shift towards the prompt school has been really interesting to see. And like I said, I'd love to participate more, but I just don't have the time. But I think perhaps thinking about, maybe this is for next week, but I think moving away from moving the discussion about on the study track from how should the Yak Collective implement this, and just moving it towards a general study track of what's happening in this space, I think it's probably like a more interesting approach for this collective. I think a lot of the discussion in some senses did get bogged down in like, how should we approach this, and what is feasible for us, and do we want to turn it into an economic model, et cetera, et cetera. And I think just kind of having the discussions and putting them in different metaphorical framings and looking at things that other groups of people might not be inclined to look at is a more interesting way to approach this topic, rather than the question of like, should we form a DAO, or should we utilize this technology in some way. This is my thoughts, and I'll pass it on to Maya. Mayor, sorry.
It's fine. Nobody knows. Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm using a different computer. It's fine?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, okay. So first, I'd like to disagree with you on one particular point. At least for people like me, having an organizing principle like how would we implement this in the Yak Collective is really, really helpful in doing what you said, which is some sort of learning activity. And if I look at the fall and the spring sessions, I definitely learned a lot about the crypto space. I can't say that all the pieces have fallen into space, but I can now jump from one rock to another. And in fact, if you were to ask me what the most valuable takeaway that I have, it's actually the introduction to Brett Scott. who talks about the difference between money and not money. And he does that in order to peel away some of the hype. So when I do retrospective, it was definitely very valuable. It was valuable in seeing a lot of different aspects of all different types. And I wrote in the voice meta, it looks to me like we talked about 4 different things. One is tech, the actual technology, and a good example, recent example, is what Nathan talked about. There's vibe and its close cousin attitude, but the difference is, from where I look at it, is vibe is all of the hype and excitement, and we can do anything with crypto and down with Wall Street, while attitude has to do with how we look at the world and what kind of problems we want to solve and what can the solutions look like. And the last category is what I would call experience. We actually heard from people who were doing it. We talked about people who tried and failed or tried and succeeded. And yes, then when I look at all of these dimensions, I ask, well, what of it is for the Yak Collective, and what of it is things that will be done by the Yak Collective? And it just seems to me that the main contributions that the Yak Collective can give to this world is setting an example for a certain type of DAO. But the big question mark I still have after, let's call it 2 semesters, is that the Yak Collective is not a trustless society. And it appears, and maybe I haven't resolved the contradiction yet, that crypto is designed to work in a trustless society, with any mechanism of trust being provided by the blockchain, when in fact it's quite the opposite, at least in the Yak Collective. There's a lot of trust going on, a lot of people could do bad things or do good things. So that's my takeaway. If I summarize, learned a lot. It was a very interesting mix, not only of subjects, but also of different ways of looking at it. And I'm still not sure how it applies to a small, relatively small group like the Yak Collective. So I pass it on. Who do I pass it on to?
Meredith?
No, she just joined. That's why.
Okay, I can go next if Meredith just joined.
Oh, I can go. I can go.
Oh, you can
'Cause
go.
I was on earlier, and then I popped off.
All right.
So I got the intro. So I guess what was it's a little it's a retrospective kind of what we did in the fall and the winter and the spring. I guess one of the things that most resonated with me was getting your hands dirty with Colony, and even looking a little, and also I don't know if they were guest speakers, but I feel like we had people come from different communities to talk about what they were working on, and that was really enlivening for me. I don't know if it was the fall or the winter, but Commit Vortex and I had sort of attempted to do a project around the lexical. I totally forget the name, and that was an interesting experiment and sort of trying something out that ended up not being successful, like as a product, but successful, sort of, as like personally. And I guess that's it. Those are my comments. I enjoyed the presentations that people gave, the deep dives.
All right.
So Venkat.
All right. Yeah, so this was an interesting cycle. And I think for me, the big highlight was trying Colony and Clarity and kind of failing at both in both shallow and deep ways. And what I mean by that is shallow way is I think we did an okay job organizing the experiment to just like kick the tires and understand how the software works. So that's the shallow failure. And if we ever like try out, I don't know, new infrastructures and products in the future, we should probably like design the experiment slightly better. But the deep failure, it was not our failure, but I think the failure of the space, which is I think it didn't work very well for us because the technology is not very good yet. And this was true of both. A colony, I think, is seriously overpowered, not just for us, but even for DAOs that are much more strictly DAO-like and have like a lot of resources to manage. So I think I remember there was some discussion around, yeah, we don't really like deal with decisions involving millions of dollars or how to buy lots of bored apes and things that actually people would care enough about to vote carefully on. But my suspicion is even if we did have that, colonies, well, not necessarily overpowered, but over designed too early, maybe. So there's some things right about the model, some things wrong. And I think we saw the shift in the sector through the last few months of people going from like sort of waterfall vision based full design of the whole system to the more composable approach that Gnosis Zodiac is taking, but I'm not sure that's super effective as well. And I think part of the reason is people are trying to solve the chicken egg problem of what's the technology good for at all? Like, should we use it for things like Toucan protocol for like climate credits? Should we use it for like regular corporations? So they're trying to like search for applications and use cases at the same time as they're trying to like discover the design patterns for the product itself, as in the standard interaction patterns and design patterns of Web 2 products don't really work well, but it's not yet clear what the good design patterns for Web 3 products are. So for example, Colony, when you propose a motion to do a decision, there's, I think the standard, what was it, 72-hour waiting period. And the 72-hour waiting period for the motion to close, the tempo doesn't quite match what a particular community might do. For example, most things we do here are on a weekly cadence, and if something is going on a 3-day cadence, it kind of is like just out of sync with the way we work. So that's like a small example of a little UX I don't know, glitch that makes the product like highly unusable in certain contexts. So I think there's going to be a lot of things like that. So that was to me the biggest learning, that the products available are going through this chicken and egg of trying to find applications as well as design patterns at the same time. And that's why they're kind of like failing in a deep way. And the other one we tried, Clarity, that one's more interesting since I think it started out as a non-Web3 project management thing, then sort of tried to reinvent itself as a project management thing. And it's being used by a few things like Cabin DAO. I think Jenna is the one who spotted it and brought it over, and Cabin DAO is where she saw it, and Cabin is using it effectively, apparently. But I would be surprised to find that lots of people are using Clarity effectively because, I mean, long before Web3, I've had a standing interest in like productivity software, getting things done type things. And it strikes me as it's kind of like very well designed and has lots of utopian assumptions baked into the software, but people are much messier than the software seems to assume. So again, there I think lots of iteration cycles to discover the right mix of UX and applications have to happen. So the summary of those sort of hands-on observations to me is this is going to be a long slog figuring out products that actually work. And now that we are in the crash, and even though we are entering summer, we are really entering a potentially extended winter for the technology sector. it's going to be a case of shaking out all these things and figuring out how things can work, how they actually work, and what they can work for. And for people like us who are more on the early user experimental sort of users category, our question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we want to build around this sort of shaky technology that's going through a winter? So I don't know the answer to that yet. So that was the big thing that jumped out at me. The other smaller thing is, I think the Toucan protocol was interesting in that my expectations were higher than what it turned out to actually be. So I mean the technology itself, not Kamit's presentation on it. So Kamit, I really liked your presentation on it, but it was underwhelming. Like I was hoping it would be a more interesting application of blockchain to climate, and it was not. So yeah, those are my reactions. And yeah, I do think moving from sort of general reading to a little bit hands-on in between winter and spring cycles really helped develop intuitions a lot better, at least for me. And that's something to think about when we plan the next cycle next week. But all right, I see Vinay is also on, and even though I don't think you attended maybe a couple of sessions this cycle, but yeah, actually, since you've been around the space exploring other stuff, maybe you can just share comments generally about kind of your observations of the space. So Vinay?
Hey, yeah, I have participated very sparsely, like I was just like come up for listening to a few sessions. So I was just going through the retrospective, and I can share a couple of thoughts. First thing is what I liked, the part that I kind of enjoyed was doing sessions to take temperature of the space as a whole and like try to provide some structure to all the noise out there, like putting Web3 canon materials, like having reading sessions on that, and try to organize all of that into like a singular, more coherent structure of like how to handle this space as a newcomer, anyone who wants to work in this space, and or even for companies working in this space, how can they like position themselves in relation to everything that's happening around. So that's one part that I liked about it from my little bit of participation. And I have one suggestion also, that if you guys can incorporate for the next season. So mainly it's about, so there's reading sessions and where we discuss and talk about what's happening out there or what people are writing about it, and or writings of Venkatesh himself as well. But and then there's the other end of the spectrum where we either try to incorporate as a DAO, or like build it as a DAO, or try to like experiment with projects like Colony. There's a middle ground as well, which I think could be useful to try out, where like you are doing more than reading, but not fully bootstrapping or starting a new project, but more like you do raids of these new Web3 projects, where like 10 people like attending a call can go and do a testing session. Everybody goes to that website with a Web3 wallet. Like it doesn't have to have money, but just use it. For example, Lens protocol is a Web3 social protocol. There are a bunch of new experiments happening, so everybody goes out and like tries to test it out as a early user of Web3. So I think like testing that out as early users of Web3 might give you fresh stuff from stuff that is already been written about, and it's not time consuming or like that. It doesn't demand high commitment as in like building stuff and starting instances of tech for yourself as well. So I feel like this could be a good intermediate step that's helpful towards to progress. So that's it, guys. I'll have to actually run to another work meeting I have, but looking forward to try to find time to catch up more. And I'll check the notes later. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, Lens protocol is actually interesting. It's by been planning to check it out as well. Miguel, the 19-year-old kid from Spain who was instrumental in doing the Constitution DAO, really smart guy. He's behind it as well. So he's up to a lot of interesting things. So that's a big confidence signal for me. So yeah, I think that's actually a good idea. We should discuss next time for maybe using in the summer cycle of planning raids. And it'll be kind of interesting because I think so much activity is actually shut down because of the crash. What's left standing is probably higher quality than what's folded. All right. I want to defer discussions of like what to actually do in the next cycle to next week. But to just plant a couple of seeds, one of the ideas that was proposed, I think I proposed it actually, I'm forgetting now, but a few weeks ago is, can we separate this blockchain track into kind of an execution track, as in actually try to become a DAO or whatever, and a study track or sub track that merges with the Friday governance calls. So that's one proposal on the table we can talk about next time. Another proposal might be the one commits kind of just informally floated, which is can we turn a version of this into something like prompt school? Third proposal would be, of course, keep it as it is and continue one more cycle of this pattern of like reading and experimenting and defer changes to the next cycle. So a few proposals on the table. So think about it for a week. We won't discuss them now. And if you have other additional new proposals, think about those too. But in the time we have remaining, I do want to ask people to react to, I guess, the cycles that are going on. Like I've been in the space since 2014 as an investor, so I've been through, I would say, 3 or 4 cycles of booms and busts in crypto. And this time it feels different to me for 2 reasons. One is it's coinciding with the biggest general tech crash since 2000. So it's like the dot-com bust, and lots of things going on in regular tech are similar. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And the other is in previous cycles, the boom and bust was purely around like investment value, like coins gaining or losing value. And this time there's actually technology being built and products and companies that are going through like crisis and so forth. So can we have another round of reactions to your general attitude towards how to like plan your own activities or actions through boom bust stuff? Like what's your psychology for navigating booms and busts? So let's start again at the top with Anuraj. If you have a quick comment on. Oh, no, Anuraj is back. Anuraj?
Hello. Yeah, so yeah, yeah. Uh, well, this is the first time I'm seeing like a tech crash, so I don't have much opinion on it. Yeah, maybe passing on to Ben.
Yeah, so I first learned about crypto back towards the end, right after the 2013 crash burst. That's when I first actually started getting interested in it. Um, I do think Venkat is right that this one, its time is a bit different. For starters, the macro environment has changed, um, in the sense that we're probably going into a period of higher inflation and sort of maybe higher interest rates for the first time since Bitcoin was created. And I've I've heard things that's either positive or negative. You'd think higher inflation would be good, but that also means that basically a lot of coins trade as risk-on assets, which means that their price could go down. And I do think it's interesting that this sort of thing, sort of bear market, has been much less price based, in the sense that if you look at previous crashes, like going from 20K down to like 5K or less, I remember. Whereas this has, I mean, maybe in percentage terms, we're down like 50% since the beginning of the year, but I don't know. I don't own a lot of coins despite working in the space, so this is, I just take the price and think it's fascinating to watch the number go around, which is what I would suggest. I would, even though I guess you could say I'm optimistic on the long term ability of the space, I would not be very short term. just knowing the space exists is possibly sufficiently long on the space that you don't need to put too much capital behind it. Is what my not investment advice. Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think the macro environment is changing, and that doesn't actually have anything to do with crypto. Clearly, the macro environment of the 2010s was eventually going to shift anyway. And I think the war in Ukraine, the COVID disruptions have started pushing the world into new directions. And how that interacts with crypto as well, I think it's going to be very fascinating. It might not be good, but it will definitely be interesting. But yeah, and it also is interesting that the sort of people crypto is just incredible at sucking so much air out of things because everyone wants to talk about it at all times when really it's almost like a mirror on the rest of the financial markets. So basically what's going on in crypto has also been going on in stuff like all the tech stocks, and and that's also very interesting because that really hasn't happened for a while, as Ben Gat said, since 2020 2000. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think we're in for interesting times. So I'll move on.
I don't know that I have too many things to say on this point. I mean, I think on that point about being a reflection, um, I think now more than in the past, the the correlation between crypto and traditional stocks um, has has kind of come into alignment more than it has. So I think that's also sort of points to the kind of the macro difference. I think also, I mean, this latest wave definitely brought, like, in the same way that, like Ben said, like it sucks the air out of everything. It also brought a lot more people into interacting with this space in a way that they hadn't before. I mean, I remember this around, what was it, 16, 17, whatever. This similar kind of energy of everyone getting really interested and investing and, thinking about different incentive structures for public utilities and all of this stuff. But somehow this cycle feels like even more exaggerated. And I think, the fact that, yeah, I think like definitely like the kind of real world interactions are what's going to be like the more interesting future development, and to see if any kind of boom comes out of that. I mean, I think the kind of intersection with cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and political campaigns is going to be really significant. I think all of these efforts to like tether cryptocurrencies to current events, whether that be protesting or resistance movements, or the war, or different like legislation that's passed. I just think that like I think it's kind of in this phase now where it is trying to figure out how to relate to the world in a more tangible, real way. And I think that is more significant and more in alignment with like traditional stocks, partly because just the level of adoption has risen. And so I think once, like, Venkatesh was talking earlier about like it is like trying to figure out what the design patterns for the blockchain are, in contrast or in distinction to the way that we're used to the internet being set up in this kind of, quote unquote Web 2 format. I think I kind of feel like once uh, people can stop designing for the way that the internet is, um, and start designing for um, like the kind of technical affordances of the technology, uh, we might, I don't know, this is really bad speculation, but I think that's part of what's like hampered this, like I feel like that's part of why this dip, this bear market feels so different, is because there is sort of a kind of desire to manifest a kind of convergence with Web 2, and it really was like not. I just think there are different, like Venkatesh said, different design patterns, and I think so. Yeah, real world application and like what takes off from that, and then also figuring out how to get out of this like mentality of designing for the affordances that we're used to having, but rather designing for the affordances of the technology as they actually exist. I think those are the kind of things that I look for in terms of like thinking about like what to pay attention to during this period of time. I'll pass to Maya.
Well, I don't feel that it's different. In other words, when I look at the tech crisis, obviously the blockchain crisis is different, but I forget where I read it, but we should be looking at the boom, not at the bust, because boom means that people spent a lot of money building infrastructure, human capital, exploring possibilities, and now all of these things died, but we still have the human capital, the experience, the capabilities. So it's true that you're not going to get a $1 billion valuation on a companies that mints NFTs. But if you now find an application with more immediate value, okay, if we use blockchain to solve voting registration, for example, that's still monetizable and the economy is still churning along. I remember in 2003, 2002, and again in 2009, we called together all the workers and told them, listen, we don't know what's going to be, but we're not going to fire anybody. And guess what? We didn't have to fire anybody. So the work volume went down a little bit, but there were still companies out there. They were still developing products, and the products had a real business case. It wasn't, oh, pet.com, $1 billion, and life went on. So in a sense, now's the time for consolidation. We have people, we have knowledge, we have infrastructure. Now we have to find the applications which are valuable. That's my look at it. And in fact, I'm more worried by the chip crisis, because the chip crisis means that even if we have people working for less using existing infrastructure, they still can't ship because they don't have chips. So that is perhaps more bothersome than the crypto crash or the tech stock crash. If I were an investor, I'd obviously feel differently. But as somebody who works, it means people will make a little bit more money, a little bit less money, and will have to look for a different type of opportunity. But it's just a different type of opportunity. So that's my take.
Meredith?
And
Okay, so I'm always wrong about all of these predictions. But like I lived through the credit crisis. And, I always go back and look at those charts, and this feels different, but in a good way, which probably means that I'm wrong. But it reminds me of 2001, where you had a shakedown in internet companies like Pets.com or oh, I totally forget, GeoCities. But in the end, everyone uses the internet. like it won. And I have a good friend of mine who had a successful Web 1.0 company, and she thinks Web 3 is bullshit. And she's always like, I've seen this, Meredith. I've seen this story. And I'm like, yeah, it's like everyone uses it. Like everyone uses the internet. So I kind of, I take a really long-term view on this. But who does know this? This is very different than anything I've seen in my life. Looking at bonds and commodities, and so this is new. I don't know. Okay, next.
All right. Yeah. And I do get the sense that this time it is different, and some of my friends kind of make fun of me that it's basically middle age pretending to be insight into current trends, and there's some of that. Like this particular crash is intersecting with interesting financial planning choices for me. So just before the crash, for example, I was trying to unwind some of my investments to get a down payment for a house, and then housing markets were going like through the roof, and interest rates were super low, and now interest rates are high again, and housing prices have come down slightly. But now is a terrible time to unwind investments, to move money into real estate. So there's that kind of thing giving me slightly a gloomy outlook. But on the other hand, there's also, I think, significant differences between 2000 and now. So I think I might be the reverse of Mayor's attitude. I'm actually not that worried about chips, because things like chips or like automobiles, they're like highly centralized, concentrated industries, and when people and the crises are like super visible, and the responses to them are highly centralized and strong. So, for example, the moment semiconductor crisis became evident, and everybody realized that Taiwan was very vulnerable because of the Chinese geopolitical situation, I think in the last 2 years alone, Japan and Korea have announced like really big investments in like latest semiconductor fabs. The US is doing a kind of stupider thing, but it's also promised a lot of investment. So I think this will solve itself. And talking to experts in the industry, since I work as a consultant with them, I believe their estimate that the chip crisis will be solved by like 2024, 2025. But I think the threats for crypto are not that kind of specific threat, but this sort of correlation with like a jackpot of crises. And I'm using the term jackpot because William Gibson, the science fiction writer, he just tweeted, I'll share it later, but a screenshot of a page from Wired magazine in 1999 where people were super optimistic, but worried that things might go wrong. And they listed like a list of 10 ways in which things might go wrong. And the funny thing is they thought only one of them could go wrong. And looking at that list from 2022, it's obvious that 7 of the 10 ways people thought things could go wrong have actually come true already. Like, they were worried about a pandemic. They were worried about Russia turning into a post-communist kleptocracy. They were worried about like 6 other things, and all of them are true today. So that's kind of funny that the most pessimistic people could be in 1999 around like 10 different scenarios was actually too optimistic, because what's actually happened is like 6 of those things at once. Uh, and those things are still true, like including the climate crisis and stuff. So when I look at crypto in the context of all that, my reaction is that this bear cycle is possibly going to be longer than any particular input to this particular industry, like GPUs or something. And the planning horizon to think through is maybe 7 to 10 years rather than 2 to 3 years. Like previous cycles and downturns I've kind of lived through have been like 2, 3 years. So I'm comfortable planning around 2 to 3 years of like economic downturn. I'm not comfortable planning around like 10 years of economic downturn because I've never lived through that. But that might actually be what we're facing now, because so many of the general structural problems that are showing up now, they're actually that long term. And when I think of like what do you do with a particular activity like crypto in such a long downturn, to me it seems like maybe the way to think about it is, yes, it won't die. Everybody will use it in the future. I have the same confidence Meredith does, but maybe the nature the technology takes will be slightly different. So the internet in late 1990s, everybody was super optimistic that it would do good things for like a growing, thriving world. And that's roughly what happened. I mean, we had problems with Facebook and Twitter and like elections being hacked, but overall, the vision was positive and the reality is also positive. People are being more creative, they're doing creative things, they're writing more, they're making videos, they're doing having like fun. So the internet, I would say, at least as a not on the backlash side, I'm not a critic. So to me, it seems like the vision and reality are at least on the same side of the ledger. But with the crypto, um, the backlash is already out there anyway. But it seems to me that maybe the vision and the reality might be slightly different. The reality might end up being, yes, we use it, but as almost a dark age type technology, as in the world is in like constant crisis. And this is one of the technologies that helps us manage the sort of crisis environment. So I'm still thinking through that idea, but that gives you a very different sort of like investors use this phrase product zeitgeist fit. So I think the product zeitgeist fit we were expecting like in 2015 or so was much more rosy, like a libertarian utopia or something. And the product zeitgeist fit we are expecting now is much more like, grim dark world is falling to pieces and crypto is the only thing that keeps it together kind of fit vision. So that's something to think about. But all right, we're just over time. So next week, please think about what to do with the summer cycle, both concrete sort of process proposals on how to structure it, as well as content, as in what would you like to think about, read about, experiment with. All right. See you guys next week.